All right, welcome back to some more Black Hat Python. In this one, we're going to be implementing an SSH client. We're going to be connecting to an SSH server. Now, in the future videos, we're going to actually be building a more fully functional client as well as an SSH server. As you see, I actually built that out already, but for sake of keeping the videos condensed enough where they're not ultra long, we're going to do that in a separate video. This one here, this first example that they provided for us, very simple. It actually, all it's doing is, it's doing an SSH connection to an SSH server and running a single command that we will pass in when we run this. Now, this isn't even really a command line interface in the sense that we can give it flags and things like that. It's literally, you just run the program and it prompts the user for, the IP, the port, the command you want to run, and then makes the connection and runs the command. So let's just step through this line by line first. First of all, we're importing the Paramiko module, and this is just a module for Python that allows you to very easily implement SSH. So we're going to define a function here called SSH_command, all right, and it's going to take in pretty much all the parameters that we're going to be passing in. It's going to take in the IP address, port, the user, the password, and the command that you want to run. Now, from there, it's going to create a variable called client and just do a basic SSH client function here as part of the Paramiko module. This is a built-in function here. And then it will do a set missing host key policy, so auto add. So in this case, we're going to be able to automatically add the host key if we don't have it already. Like if we haven't connected to the server before, we'll go ahead and auto add. Now, the reason that we're gonna be comfortable doing this in this situation is we're controlling both ends of the connection. So when we set the policy to accept the SSH key for the server we're connecting to and make the connection, it should be fine from like a security perspective, right? And then the client connect here is just, connecting based off of the data down here for the most part. We're kind of remapping certain things here too. And what we're going to do here is we're going to have the standard in, standard out, standard error. Now, in this case, we don't even care about the standard in as in the sense we're not going to do anything with standard in other than running the command itself. We're not going to need to interact with that variable at all. So that's why we're using an underscore here. This is just a standard thing you'll notice in Python is whenever you want to ignore a value, you can use it as an underscore. It's basically like a throwaway variable, if you will. So that's why we have this. We will be doing stuff with standard out and standard error, however, right? So we're going to do a client exec command, okay? And we're going to pass in the command to that, right? So as far as the output, there's going to be two parts to it, right? There's standard out and then standard error, right? Standard error being in case there is, something that, is an error message, right? That is actually, as far as the operating system is concerned, that is in a different file descriptor and everything, right? And so it's treated differently. So, for example, if you are on a Windows box and you try to run ls, it's going to say, hey, this command isn't recognized, right? That wouldn't show up in standard out. That would show up in standard error. And, on the other hand, if you ran dir, it will list the file contents, the contents of the folder, right? That would be in standard out, not in standard error. So we want to output both of those. That's why our output's going to be equal to, standard out read lines and standard error read lines. Oops, did something funny there. And so if there is any output at all, meaning if there's any standard out or standard error, then we're going to print this text here just so it's clear what's happening when we run it on the terminal. And then for each line in the output, we are going to print the line. So we're just going to print off everything. We're going to strip any white space before or after, or before and after, I should say. And then down here, we've seen this in pretty much every video, but basically we're saying that if this is run as the main file, then we can go ahead and import another module. This is the getPass module. And what it's going to allow us to do is interact with the basically interact with passwords and things like that, or even usernames as well. As the next line, I commented this out because in this case, I wanted to be able to input any username. But if I were to run it with this instead, it would actually be grabbing my username based off of the username of the user I run this as. So for example, if I were to run this SSH_cmd.py Python script as my Kali user, it will automatically set my user as Kali. Now, because we're going to be using this to connect to a remote SSH server, we're going to need to be able to specify the username. But if I was connecting to, I don't know, maybe my own SSH server or something that I know like the user that I'm going to connect as is a user that I have available on my system, then maybe I would want to use this instead here. Now, for the password, we will be using the getPass module because it will allow us to enter in a password to where if someone's shoulder surfing you, they won't be able to see what you're typing, right? And it's just a more secure way to do it, right? And so that's why we're going to be using getPass there, right? And then lastly, these things here are it's going to prompt the user for the IP address, port, and command, and then it's going to call the SSH_command function, passing in all this data. Now, if you notice here, these ORs here, we're setting default values. So if the user doesn't enter in an IP address, it will default to this IP. If they don't enter a port, it will default to this port. If they don't enter a command, it will default to ID. So we're going to go ahead and demo this. Now, to do that, I am going to actually use another SSH server that's already in existence, because this is just an SSH client that we have created here. We have not created an SSH server yet. So for this one, I'm actually going to be using over-the-wire bandit because I know that utilizes SSH. If I go to the site here, level 0, here is the instructions to connect. Let me just make this bigger so you guys can see. Basically, we got this server here, port 2220, username bandit0, password bandit0. So if I go ahead and run this script, it's in ops scripts black hat py directory. I'll go ahead and do it here. So it's easier to see that way. So I'll say python 3 ssh cmd.py. Now the username, if we recall, is bandit0. The password is also bandit0. And like I was saying, we're using the getPass module. See, when I type that here, you can't see what I was typing there. And that's the reason why we're using this module here, basically. And then as far as the server IP, we're going to enter in this host name here. And then for the port, 2220 was the port. And we can just run the ID command. Now remember, we said, hey, if the user doesn't give us anything, we're going to default to ID. So I can just hit enter and it should run the ID command for me. So now we see the output and we see the actual result there. The ID command here of bandit0, GID bandit0, groups bandit0. So that would just be like if we ran that, we SSH to the server as this user and entered the ID command. So that's basically all this simple SSH client is doing here. You are basically just connecting to an SSH server and running a command of your choice. Very simple, very bare bones, but something you could definitely expand upon if you wanted to. Like, for example, instead of doing password auth, you could have this set up to where it's doing auth with SSH keys, and then you could also have it where it gives you a full-blown shell instead of one command at a time. Now, if you're interested in that full-blown shell, we're going to be doing that in the next video where we do another SSH client using an actual full-blown shell, and we're going to show you how you can do this with a Windows server, which this is the big use case for this here, to be honest. There's a big use case, right? Because with Windows, almost all the time, you'll never have an SSH, the SSH service running for you, right? And now you can install PuTTY or something like that, but if you're working with a server, you would have to install that ad hoc, right? If it has Python on the box, you could simply create your own SSH server an SSH client and send and receive data that way. And I'll show you guys everything I'm talking about in the future videos. So definitely stay tuned for that if that sounds like that would be of interest to you. And thanks for watching to this point. If you have already, be sure to subscribe if you haven't, hit the like button as well to help get this message out there. If you want to see some of the other stuff we've done here on this Black Hat Python series, maybe you've kind of skipped around, you haven't seen it yet, go ahead and check out the content on screen now for the Black Hat Python series. I'll see you guys right over in those videos. Thanks for watching.